ready to introduce Sally and Nick. Sally is going to speak first. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming on the tour of our new house. I hope you can all see the slides now.
You're a little bit soft, Sally. Maybe you need to project.
All right, I shall speak louder. Is that better?
Thank you.
And thank you, Tom, and thank you for inviting us to share our house with you. So, as Tom said, we're going to divide this into two sections. And I'm first of all going to spend about 10 minutes just talking about the design and some of the design features that we put into our house. So this is what we started with in 1950s, originally quite a small bungalow that had been extended a couple of times. And unfortunately, because of the way it had been extended, it was not an ideal structure. And when we started looking at it, we looked at, first of all, completely renovating it because of the way it had been extended. That wasn't really practical. And it was one of those things that we could just see we were going to end up having more and more problems that arose as we tried to take it apart and put it back together again. So we decided actually that it would be much better to start again and build something much more efficient and simple, because what we wanted to do was build a passive house. So essentially we wanted low energy, passive or near passive. We haven't actually gone for the passive house certification, but we wanted to be as near energy efficient as possible. So it needed to be airtight and use energy saving technologies. The original house, we are not on a gas main, so we were reliant on oil, which was a problem in the old house and now is even more of a problem. But so we had to think about how we were, what energy sources we had access to. It was going to be extremely expensive to get a gas line laid to our house. So we talked to a couple of architects, but eventually the architect we spoke to has a lot of experience building passive houses. And I think that was very important to us because we tried to use somebody who had less experience, and it caused problems because we needed somebody who understood what needed to happen. So the architect has very strong ideas about building biology principles, essentially limiting the use of volatile organic compounds in the materials used to build the house, and yes, generally trying to be as carbon neutral as possible in the building materials. So he was very keen on that, and so we combined those two things together. So within the house, we already had solar panels on the house. We put solar panels on the original house, which you might have spotted in the first picture, about 10 years ago. So we had those. We took those solar panels off and we reoriented them. That's another advantage of starting the house again, is we moved them from east facing, where certainly during the winter we had a problem with overshadowing from trees, which cut down the amount of time the solar panels were actually working. Even on a sunny day, if they're under shadow, they don't work efficiently. So we've turned them around to be south facing, and we've already seen a 50% increase in our generation over the last year that we've been in the house. So it's made an enormous difference simply repositioning those solar panels. We managed to hang on to our feed-in tariff, which was also quite a bonus. But we have 16 245 watt solar panels, which are now 10 years old, but still working just as efficiently as when we first put them on. We've seen absolutely no drop in efficiency at all over those 10 years. As I said, we have no gas, so we're reliant on electricity. Now that's a problem, particularly with hot water. So one of the devices that we have installed is a generated electricity manager. Now that monitors our export from the solar panels, and when we are not actually using power from the solar panels, it automatically diverts it to our hot water tank. And this device only cost us £250, and we reckon that we can monitor how much we think we're saving based on the amount of electricity we would have had to put into the hot water for the house. And we think it's going to take us less than a year to get back that £250. And absolutely, definitely worthwhile putting that little piece of kit in if you have a hot water tank. If you're in a house like I mentioned it to my dad, thinking this would be good for him. He has solar panels, but he has a boiler that heats the water directly. He has no hot water tank, so this is absolutely no use to him. So a very simple little piece of kit that we have is a Showersave heat exchanger, and this is very, very simply, it runs the hot water coming out of the shower drain. It runs the cold water coming into the shower up a pipe that is surrounded by the hot water coming down through the drain, and that's it. That's as complicated as it is, and it simply preheats the water very slightly, so we're using less hot water from the tank. Very, very simple, but the manufacturers claim up to 2/3 of the waste heat can actually be recovered by just preheating the cold water. Because the house is sealed, we have mechanical ventilation and heat recovery, which is a very large box which sits downstairs and manages a ventilation system running around the whole house. So you can see at the bottom of this picture, and there are little flying saucer effects up here. These are the vents that we have in all the upstairs rooms, all the upstairs bedrooms. You can see here, there's a curtain rail here for scale, just to give you an idea of how big that is. And it simply sits there and pumps air into the rooms. It circulates the air constantly. There are 2 vents on the outside of the house, an in vent and an out vent. We bring in fresh air from outside. That air is filtered through a paper filter. And there is a heat exchanger which works exactly the same as a fridge would, in that it uses waste heat going out through the out vent to heat the air coming in. So in theory, the house should all be at a constant temperature, and all rooms should be the same. That's the headline that people read. That is not actually how it happens. Different rooms in this house are very, very different temperatures. But I do have a friend who said it does work, that if your house is cold, go and run a bath, because that will help in the winter. That will help to heat the entire house, which is true, because you get a lot of warm, damp air in the bathroom, and it will be redistributed and it'll start to heat the house up. The other way to heat the house up is simply to have a party as well, because lots of people coming in and breathing out will help heat the house, because we are very, very well insulated. But the ventilation system will also help with cooling in the summer, because it works backwards when it's warmer outside than inside. So it helps a little bit. It's not entirely silent, but it's very quiet. I don't think you would notice it if you weren't actually listening for it. If you go and listen for it, and at night sometimes you can hear it, but you can change the level of the ventilation. So if someone's having a shower, it's a good idea to turn it up, and then it is slightly noisier. And at night we have it turned down so that it's quieter. So yeah, now the whole house is built with Porotherm blocks, which having just done a holiday to the continent, we have discovered are extremely common elsewhere in Europe, but not in the UK. And they are clay blocks. You can't see from that quite how thick they are, but they're approximately cubic. And that our ones are stuffed with rock wool. They aren't always, but these ones are. So I have seen them in a sort of a honeycomb arrangement, but that is the entire thickness of the wall, is simply one of those thick. So they're a bit like breeze blocks in a way. They trap air. They have a very interesting construction mortar system. They have very, very thin layer of mortar on the top, which just locks them together. But the whole house went up incredibly quickly, because they are very big, and they just and the company who makes them and imports them into the UK will train builders in using them, because it's a very simple system. You just need to show somebody how to use it, and there's a special sort of mortar laying device, which is, and the builders love them. They thought they were great. They've never used them before, but they're perfectly happy with them. So we have a single skinned wall, the thickness of these blocks. They are relatively expensive. And the other downside is that they are relatively brittle, which means that you are restrained as far as fixings go. And for example, at one point we wanted a Juliet balcony fitted upstairs, and one of the reasons we couldn't do that, apart from the cold bridging, is because it wouldn't have been safe. It wouldn't have reached safety standards, because the blocks are not strong enough. But we thought that was a small price to pay for these blocks. Obviously, we've got triple glazing, so keeps the noise down, keeps the temperature, easier to regulate the temperature. We Wanted blinds. I didn't like the idea of blinds because I know how much dust they collect and how hard they are to deal with. These are actually internal blinds, and they're actually on the outside of the triple glazed window. So we have 2 sets of French windows facing onto the garden. And in the summer, it was we needed some shading because in the summer it was very hot. A certain amount of heat was coming into the house, so closing the blinds meant that we could keep the temperature down, which worked very, very efficiently. But we did have the blinds closed because that kept the sunlight out. But it wasn't. If you have the blinds on the inside, a certain amount of heat will come through. You can't stop the heat coming through, but the blinds are on the outside, so actually they were even more efficient than they would have been if the blind had been on the other side. So those are excellent, and they come with the windows. They're part of the windows. You can access them by opening the window on the outside. The other thing we have is a cool pantry. This is essentially outside the main house. So a passive house is built with a thermal envelope that keeps the heat in or out, depending on which way you're looking at it. And this is a little extension that we have on the north side of the house with no windows, which is outside. So it's got a standard external door on it to keep the temperature down. So it's cool in the summer and cold in the winter. And it's currently unventilated. We are going to put some more ventilation in because we do have an issue of air when it cools down can hold less water. So therefore the humidity goes up if you let warm air into it and then instantly cool it down. Right, and I think that is where I am going to stop talking for now, and I think Nicole is going to open the floor for any questions. And Tom, you're still muted.
Sorry, thank you, Sally. Yes, thank you. That's good. So I don't think anyone's put any questions in chat yet. Do think about what you want to ask. But in the meantime, perhaps I'm interested to know, like you mentioned, various features, Sally, like the Venetian blinds that would help your home stay cool in a heat wave. So how was it this summer?
There was one particular day because I work from home, so it was important to me to keep the house cold. And I remember going outside and being absolutely hit by opening the door. It was like an oven outside, and I hadn't quite realised how hot it was. I got into quite a good system. I did open the windows. I opened the windows first thing in the morning, and then I closed them down, closed the blinds downstairs, and it did help. We were keeping the temperature down by tens of degrees when it was really hot, so it did work.
I think we've got a question from Dan and Stuart. So if you want to unmute and ask a question first, Dan, please.
Sure, I can do that. So you mentioned that the MVHR system that you had installed had a noticeable cooling effect. I'm aware of an MVHR system being used for heat exchange to keep warm air into the house. I wasn't aware that you could get a significant cooling effect out of them. How noticeable was it, and how did you manage that, please?
Shall I do that, Sally? I mean, essentially, it's the same technology. It's trying to keep the inside air at the temperature the inside air was by making sure the expelled air becomes the same temperature as the incoming air. So, if you come back at the end of a hot day and it's already hot in the house, it's not helping. It'll do nothing. If you've, I think that management of ventilation that Sally does between 5:30 and 7:30 in the hot days of June is vital to get the overnight cool air in, and then that will keep it that way. I think Sally's point is probably the important one. By the time I'm coming home from work, it's getting round to being warmer again. But it does that job. I think
possibly, sorry, just to interrupt you, I think the thing is not to think of it as cooling the house. It's a set of technologies that insulate the house, because I think it's not actively cooling very much. It's stopping it getting warm. So I think Nick's point of, if the house is warm, it's probably not going to help very much, because it's the difference in the temperature. So yes, you maybe have to work a little bit harder to make sure you're managing things. It's not going to significantly cool. It will keep it cool, but it won't cool it down necessarily.
That makes sense.
The other thing it has is a setting that allows that will give the temperature range. Sorry, I hope that's not me. And it will bypass the heat exchanger, so you know that it's cool outside, but you want to cool the house at a sort of 8 to 10 p.m. on a summer's day. You can say, no, just bring me the outside air in and don't try and warm it up, because I'm actively trying to cool my house down. So there's a setting on the controller that will manage that for you.
Right. Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
Great. Stuart, would you like to ask your question? I think there may be a bit of interference there, so I'm going to mute Stuart. Apologies, Stuart, and I'll ask his question for him. So Stuart says he's interested in the windows with blinds because his house is south-facing. How expensive are they?
I think they added a few £100 possibly to each pair of French windows, but they're not available as a retrofit. It was an option that the manufacturer offered with that particular design of window. So yeah, we looked at external shutters and sort of the continental style and internal shutters, both of which were difficult to work into the design of the house. So as an add-on, not very much, but it does mean putting in a whole brand new triple glazed 4 square meter window, which is not cheap.
I've got a question about the MVHR actually. Have you had to do any maintenance on it? Because I mean, it's where does it sit, and have you had to change filters? You know, what level of maintenance are we talking about?
So the filters need changing every 4 months, I think, is the manufacturer's recommended, and they are. I don't know if people probably don't ever change the carburetor filter on the car, but it's a paper filter in a sort of a zigzag arrangement to give the maximum surface area, and they're about that kind of size, maybe 4 inches thick, 10 centimeters, 6 inches wide, and maybe 60 long, and that they are £20 a pair, something like that, £30 a pair for those filters. The unit itself sits in a cupboard in the utility room. It's quite big. The width of it is 50 centimeters or so. The height maybe a little bit more than that, and a good 40 centimeters deep. So it dominates a reasonable sized cupboard that was built for it to go into. But other than that, no, it just sits there and does its thing. And if you remember to put it into holiday mode when you go away, and it just comes on then every half hour for 2 minutes to turn the air over, then that's all there is to it. And I don't know what the power consumption is, but it's not very much at all. Just a couple of fans blowing away lazily.
And you said the filters need replacing every 4 months, but then we discovered that you can hoover them. So as long as you don't have too much dust in the house, it wouldn't have worked the first time because there was a lot of builder's dust in the house. So the first ones probably we wouldn't have been able to reuse. We didn't discover that people do recommend hoovering them when they come out. So give them a quick hoover and stick them back in again for another 4 months and they're fine.
Fantastic.
It's amazing what's in there actually. We're right on the edge of the fields, as you've seen from the opening picture. And at the end of harvest time, when we changed them at the end of August, they're a lot dirtier then, having sucked all that summer dust and harvest stuff out of the air.
Can I ask, I mean, are you noticing the benefits of having filtered air? Like I'm allergic to that harvest dust, so I would really benefit from having that filtered out.
Certainly the house isn't covered with harvest dust, which it might have been in the past, unless we forget and open the windows. But yes, it cuts down on the things coming in.
I think Sandra's got a question as well. Sandra, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just if it's not too impertinent, I wonder how much that unit, or what sort of price that unit comes in at.
I could tell you, Sandra, if I had the builder's cost. So we went out. It was thousands, and I'm thinking probably into mid four figures. But within that, there's all the ducting that's been worked into the ceiling, so it would be incredibly destructive to retrofit one, because you've got big pipes 4 to 6 inches in diameter that need to be threaded round, and to keep the noise down, they need to have no sharp bends in. So they've had to be. It would be a very deep renovation to be able to fit one. So the fitting cost was probably as much as the equipment cost, but yeah, I off the top of my head, I would say a few thousand.
And I think Yasmin, unfortunately, her microphone's not working, but Yasmin asks, does the MVHR work in the kitchen for cooking, etc.? And what about drying clothes using MVHR? Does it help?
Well, we have the 2 sets of the extractor units that we've got in the bathrooms. I have an airing cupboard which has a wet extraction, and in the kitchen they've got special wet filters in, so they are designed to take things out. We also have an extractor fan on the hob, so I'm not sure I'd want to use it without any kind of extractor fan. I don't know how powerful it is, but we've got 2 extractors in the kitchen over where the hob is, as well as the extractor fan that goes with the hob. And certainly in the airing cupboard it's fine, but you notice it most that if you give it a quick boost if someone goes in the shower, it will keep the humidity down in the shower room, and it will clear the shower. And in fact, it was something that we struggled with slightly at first, particularly trying to persuade the children not to open the window when they'd had a shower. Say in the winter. In the summer it's fine, you can open it in the summer, but in the winter please don't open the window, because all that hot air needs to heat the house. So yeah, it does make a difference, and when you boost it on a shower, it means all the mirrors clear instantly. It does work for wet extraction. It's good.
And it's worth mentioning, as Ali hinted there, Yasmin, in a sealed house, of course, you can't have an externally extracting kitchen fan. So the hob extraction has to be internally circulating. So yeah, it's not designed to take grease out. So you wouldn't want to be just relying on that from that point of view.
Okay, great. Well, if we don't have any further questions at this stage, I'd like to hand over to Nick to continue with the second part of the presentation, please.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit was just some of our experience in actually getting this damn thing built. It's if you read the case study, you'll have realised quite how long it took from start to finish. But just moving through that journey and some of the things that not necessarily specific pitfalls, but things to be aware of on any largest project. So the first one, sorry, on the next slide is our overall timeline. So we purchased the property and moved in January 2012, and I'm told that we already had a view to doing some significant rebuilding at the time, but I wasn't involved at that stage. Around about 2013, even I had realised that the construction of the house wasn't really suitable, and that we developed a brief for an architect, a one-page list of what we wanted, either to renovate or to extend. And I think we probably considered going upwards on the original bungalow. We took that to a local architect in Cambridge, and through 2013, 2014, became apparent that she wasn't somebody that we were going to be comfortable working with, and wasn't thinking about the project the same way we were. But we were clear at that point that we had to do a fairly significant or total rebuild. We met the architects we used at a trade show, home building and renovating show in Surrey somewhere, a firm called Gale and Snowden, whose work we're very pleased with. They are in Exeter, which has sometimes been an issue. There's a lot of things where it would have been nice to pop round and look over their shoulder at the drawing, or to talk to them. So whilst I would definitely recommend Gale and Snowden to somebody who is in Devon, I'd be slightly more hesitant about recommending them for somebody in Cambridge. Although, strangely, this wasn't their first house in Cambridge. David Gale's sister-in-law, I think, has a property in the centre of town that he designed for them. So when we'd appointed them, we gave them a proper brief, or a revised brief, and within about a year, we'd gone through a cycle of initial sketches and rough costings, and come to an external design that was complete enough for us to go to planning in 2017. And then we spent a long time doing internal design changes. Some of that was definitely, I think, due to us, that this had all seemed very expensive and difficult, and we weren't necessarily always on the project. But equally, when we did, the design team they'd had on the project full time doing the external stuff were doing other things. So we were being fitted into their Friday afternoons sometimes to get that done. So that took us. That's the biggest change with hindsight. I would say that we would cut down that 2 years of internal design changes to the couple of weeks that it probably should have taken. In 2019, we were ready to go and get some quotes on that, and we were actually, in a way, quite lucky with the timing of the pandemic, because we got the quotes back in at the end of 2019. We were waiting for one final builder to quote for us, and then, of course, at the start of the pandemic, there was a general assumption that there would be an enormous recession, and that all sorts of building and trades would stop. So we were able to go back to a builder and say, look, we have the funding. We're ready to start now, but could you possibly do something with the price? And they were willing and able to do that, just to secure the work. So 2020 was then just revising those prices and getting ready to start. And then, as Sally said, with the blocks, the build went through very quickly. We moved out during October of 2020. The picture that I showed on the previous slide of the digger slicing up the old house was the 1st of November, and we moved back in mid-August. So it was just over 9 months end to end, sorry, actually just under 9 months end to end on the actual build of the project. So it's quicker than we thought, but the build being a tiny part of what we actually ended up, the 10-year journey of running the project as a whole. A few other things that I just want to mention about the tools. I find, and I know Sally also finds it very difficult to look at architects' drawings and say, is that what I want my house to look like? They sit in 2 dimensions, and yes, they're accurate. I can stand at the side or at the front and say that's what it looks like, but I couldn't see that the other way in the start. So there's a couple of tools that we'd used to produce 3D models, and they were simple enough for me to use. One was Google's SketchUp, which is a freely available tool for creating 3D models, and the other one was the system that we used. Sally, can you just pop back to slide 3 briefly? These pictures at the bottom were produced in a tool called OpenSCAD. And all one does is to define rectangles. So the ground is green, it's a rectangle. The front wall you're looking at on the left is a rectangle, but then take away from that some more rectangles, which are the windows. And by measuring the drawings, you can specify those dimensions in millimeters if you wish, and just build the house up in blocks. And then by commenting out lines of rectangles in the file, I can have the ground floor, the top floor, take the roof off, and show me the picture. And that was very much, that was a big help, I think, for us to be able to do that. The files it produces are actually suitable for 3D printing. We have a friend who sells 3D printers for a living, so we had at one point thought that we would have that built as a model for us to be able to look at if we were living in a caravan for a year, to remind ourselves what it was all going to be for. As it happened, we didn't need the caravan and we didn't get the model made, but those were really good tools that I would recommend. On bigger projects, finance, obviously, you know, we weren't in a position to dip into our pockets and pay to knock down a house and rebuild it. I think when we started looking at the project back in 2012, 13, 14, there were lots of self-build mortgages on the market. Saffron Walden Building Society used to do one. Most of the high street lenders did them. Lots of specialist lenders, and tightening up of the financial, or whatever the financial services agency's rules about how banks have to consider the risk in self-build lending has meant that almost all of those products have gone from the market. No high street lender offers these, and essentially we were left with going through a broker who specializes in self-build mortgages, or going directly to local building societies, and they generally will only lend within their area of operations. So Saffron Walden Building Society would have lent us money, but none of the other local societies in the country would have done, just because we weren't where they operated. So that was a factor. They then, even for those that specialise, it's not a key line of business for them, and I think they don't quite understand what they're doing. So one will be sent forms to complete that want to know, when was the house built? Well, it's not. You know, they sent a surveyor around to do a valuation and a survey of the old property. I think he came 2 days before the demolition crew moved in and was tapping on the walls and saying, what are these walls made of? It doesn't matter. They're not going to be here next week. But he had to fill his form in because that was what the lender's standard process had. And we got through it in the end, but it was frustrating, especially when we were paying for this guy to have driven down from the East Midlands to come and tap at some walls that were condemned. I think that I've thankfully stopped paying quite so much attention, but I think the regulation is improving, and particularly for people who are able to put their own asset, if it's a property that one has owned for a while, into the project, that the risk is being seen as more sensible, which might bring people back into the market. But it was a lot harder in 2020 than we'd expected it to be in 2013, 2014. I'm going to skip ahead because I can't talk about building control. We used a quantity surveyor, a chap by the name of Ray Birch, who lives over the top of the Chinese restaurant on Sawston High Street. They were essential. I mean, I don't know how good any other quantity surveyor is. I would certainly recommend this firm, but as a whole, they were essential to us. You know, Sally and I both work in project management type roles, but we don't know anything about building. We don't know how the trade works. We don't know what's likely to be included. We don't know where the pitfalls are, what questions to ask of suppliers, how to assess all their claims for money. And this guy was on our side. He wasn't being paid by the hour, and he wasn't making money if the budget went up. And it was his job just to make sure we were being treated fairly by everybody else. So I think for any project that's bigger than I was able to really look at and be able to look after the costs, I would recommend the quantity surveyor, because they knew. He found the builder. He proposed 4 or 5 firms to us. He helped us go out for quotes. He wrote the documents so that the builders knew exactly what they were quoting for, and that was an absolutely essential part. Building control, on the other hand, is not at all essential, and if you want, I won't say on a recorded forum which firm we used, but I would never speak to them again. It seems to attract people who are particularly pedantic and inconsistent, and would come around and tell the builder that something was all right, and then come back the next day and tell me that it wasn't, and we couldn't move into the house because they didn't like the ramp up to the front door, or the apparently it's the law, you have to have a video doorbell, so you can't move in the house because you haven't got a video doorbell. You could take it down again tomorrow. If you sold the house, you would take it with you, but if somebody who was timid and scared of intruders lived in your house, they would want a video doorbell, so we had to have one. And yes, just I don't know what to. You have to do building control, but do be aware that they're not there to help you, is all I'll say. And then at the end of it, you get a project, and eventually you put the garden back together around it, and you can forget all the pain, remember all the good bits, and have a finished project. Questions, I guess. So I've lost my chat. What was the? Yeah, Ecology Building Society. Tom, I can't remember why we certainly approached them. I think their lending limits were slightly lower than we needed. I would count them as the exception to the lenders don't know what they're lending for. I think Ecology Building Society did, and they were happy. I was able to say that our house was brick and block work, which made people happier, but Ecology will lend on straw and timber and branches woven together into nice patterns and all sorts of things. And their paperwork, when I looked at it, was not as stupid as, for example, Newcastle Building Society's was. Sorry.
So apologies. See, I've sort of mentioned them, but I'm also declaring they're a sponsor of Open Eco Homes. So make what you will of that, but I genuinely think they're making some good offers, but obviously not suitable for everyone.
Yeah, we just needed a little bit more than they were willing to lend.
I think this is the thing, that if what you have to bear in mind is, depending on what level of build you're doing, because we were putting in all these technologies and things, we needed more at a higher level of lending from the beginning, and they couldn't do that, so that's why we couldn't go with them. But for a smaller project, they'd be great.
And so, can I just comment as well on your bad experience with building control? Because we've done a retrofit. Well, we were in an ongoing retrofit, but we had a big splurge at it 2 years ago. And actually, building control were really useful. We pay who our building controller was going to be. And for example, when there was a problem to do with the location of a waste pipe through an upper floor, and he said, actually, no, you can't do it like that. And we were there with the building control person and with the builder, and we sat round and we said, oh, okay, Mr. Building Control, is there a way you can see around this problem? And between he and the builder, they worked out, an agreeable solution. So that was working well.
Yeah, good. I'm sure they can some of the time. We had this needs to be checked with the fire brigade, and I sent it to them, and the guy told me 5 times he chased them. When I picked up the phone, I got an answer in literally 20 minutes, and we'd sat for 8 weeks with this guy claiming that he'd been contacted them, and I genuinely don't believe that he had. But less said about that, the better, I think.
So I've got a few follow-up questions. You mentioned that the design period was the longest, so it took over 2 years. Why were there so many design changes? I mean, had your family configuration changed? Was it work related? Why was that so lengthy?
I think that was just our fault. They weren't. There were some ideas we had. Couple of things that we noticed hadn't been picked up. Not major things, but we talked about something, and then when we get the next drawings back, it hadn't been incorporated. But no, it would be unfair to blame the architects. I think that was just client problem by and large. Is that fair, Sally?
Yes, I think so. And it wasn't so much that we were making lots of changes, it was just that we were being slow to respond to queries and things, and it was slow at both ends because they weren't pushing us for an answer, and we sort of weren't pushing to move ahead. So there were a few changes, but they were minor tweaks, and it was more lack of momentum, I think, than anything else.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a lack of momentum. And we definitely lost it when they finished the initial design. One of the architects who'd done the lead work left the firm, and the finishing up and updating drawings ended up going back to the partner. And I think just, yeah, he was busy, and if we weren't chasing him, he was going to go home on a Friday evening, see his family, rather than dig out our file and do the tweaks, which is fair.
Well, what about the project management side of it? Because I've read that it's really important that you have a knowledgeable project manager on the site. Now, my understanding is neither of you have a building background or an architecture background. So how did you manage that? How did you decide how to go about doing this as a project? So
we'd taken a view that from before we spoke to anybody else that we weren't going to project manage ourselves. We were either going to have a lead contractor, or we were going to let very large work packages, so groundwork and foundations, walls and structure, internal fit out, and I'm possibly only having three people involved. Quantity Surveyor was quite clear that having the cost of a lead contractor to manage it all was definitely worthwhile. So yeah, we went to the builders names in the pack and just said that's it. We moved out, and they put a fence around the site, and that was their site. And technically we need their permission to come back onto it. And they had a project manager who was on site almost all the time. I think during the fit out phase, the guy was doing a little bit of the work himself, and towards the end he was starting another project. But yeah, most of the time through the groundworks phase, Mick was there every day, and during the build and fit out phase, Kish was there every day. Yeah, and that's what you pay for that. The lead contractor puts that in the price. That's why you save money if you know how to do it yourself. But you put the hours. Somebody's got to put the hours in, and it's either the client or it's the contractor.
So we haven't had any further questions in chat. Oh, sorry, I've just missed Tom's. So, Tom, would you like to unmute?
Thank you. Well, I was curious to know, do you need any space heating, or do you think you will?
The plans for the house have a wood-burning stove, which we had a slight problem with. It was due to be fitted as one of the last things to go into the house, and we had a stove. It was all ready to go, and I think the week before the engineer was coming to fit it, he suddenly realised he hadn't looked at the plans properly, and his way of constructing the chimney wasn't going to work, and he essentially said he wasn't interested, which wasn't very helpful the week before he was due to fit it. So we didn't have a wood-burning stove last winter. We have 3 towel rails. We have 3 electric towel rails, one in each of 3 bathrooms, and we have a very small sort of 40-watt heater in the airing cupboard. It's basically not much more than a glorified light bulb, which keeps the airing cupboard warm. We do have an electric heater, a small electric heater, which we did use on coldest days last winter. And we decided at that point that it was probably going to be quite a good idea to ensure that we did get the stove installed at some point, and we are still intending to do that. but we didn't have it on every day. The house is reasonably warm as long as you wear an extra jumper, really. But that's the only space heating we have. So we have no radiators, no underfloor heating. We just are try and be a bit efficient at keeping warm, and we don't mind the house being slightly cooler than some people might. You know, I don't feel that I need to go around in a t-shirt and on the coldest day of the year around the house.
Straight to the top, it's more the duller days than the colder days. The outside temperature is less important than the level of sunlight.
Right, so you're getting useful solar gain then through your window.
Definitely. If you can see on one of the external pictures, you can see that there's quite a lot of shading in the summer. I think, you know, at the summer solstice, there'd be virtually no light at all coming in through the upstairs windows at midday, but in the evenings it is, and we get more solar gain if we chop down the large apple tree in front of the house. But that was the first item on the spec that we wrote for the first architect in 2013, which said, "Thou shall not hurt our apple tree."
Okay, and because it's deciduous, then you are getting that sunshine in the winter.
You get some sunshine, but because it's as tall as the house and about 7 meters across, it still casts a decent shadow.
But conversely, it also keeps my office cool in the summer, because there is it does provide shading. I think it is actually part of the solar shading plan for the house.
Well, any other questions? We're going to finish a little early at this rate, or now's your chance to chip in, or maybe you have your own comments or suggestions. Okay, well,
I've got one final question.
Yes, please.
What are you happiest with? I mean, you've worked so hard. It's an absolutely amazing project. What are you happiest with?
Sally?
I'm very happy with my office. I have somewhere to work now. I have worked at home for the last 15 years, and I finally have a desk and a view, and I'm comfortable, and the house is not cold all year round, which the old house was. Well, apart when it was hot outside, then it was hot, but in the winter it was very, very cold. But I'm also quite pleased with my pantry, because I've always wanted a pantry.
okay, well, maybe I'll share. We've got a couple of final slides here.
Oh, before we do,
Oh, sorry.
Sandra's just
Go ahead.
a message in the chat about wood burning stoves. You need a specialist one. You have to have it's got an internal circulation, so there are specialist wood burning stoves for passive houses, but you need the right fittings, and again, they are a bit more expensive, just like everything else, but this one should be fine. The architect did tell us that it would overheat the house.
And I said, well, bring it on. There's people who are evangelists about passive house say, well, it's fantastic. It's 20 degrees all year round, summer and winter. To which my response is, well, is that how you have the air conditioning when your car set? You never get in on a hot day and think, you know what, I just want to turn this down to fridge. And you never get in the car on a stinking wet day with a cold and think, you know, just hit it to maximum. Of course you do. Everybody does. And so, yeah, there'll be days when let's roast everybody in the house. Or let's roast me.
But also, I don't think we'd need to use it very much necessarily. But, I mean, there is also the environmental issue of wood burning. But if you have one that is completely sealed, as you need for a passive house, it's actually a lot more efficient anyway. It's designed to be a more efficient burn cycle. So no, I don't think we will light it every single day. But there were some days last winter when I would have lit the fire if we had one. And I don't think last winter was a particularly cold one. So I think it will be worth putting in, and probably better than putting, you know, the little electric heater, which went on its little tour around the house occasionally last year.
Thank you so much, Nick and Sally, for giving us the benefit of all your experience. It's really good to learn what people can achieve, but also which bits were difficult and might we try to avoid if we're doing something similar.